I'm Juliet, 61 years old, a woman who smells like vanilla and yeast because I have spent for decades coaxing bread to rise and caramel to turn that precise amber my mother taught me to trust with my eyes, not a thermometer. I'm also apparently the kind of wife who can sit at a kitchen table at midnight and hear a clock accuse me of not knowing the man I married. That night the house felt like it had swallowed its own breath. I could taste the silence. It coated the back of my throat the way powdered sugar clings to a mixing bowl, sweet and suffocating. Julian's cologne lingered, but threaded through it was a floral sweetness that did not belong to me, too young, too insistent, like laughter in a church. He'd come home from yet another business dinner, the phrase stretched thin and shiny like old cellophane. He dropped his jacket, unspooled his tie and sank onto our bed as if gravity had singled him out for punishment. When his snoring settled into the familiar rut it always found, the room grew small around me. I stood careful with my movements because 40 years of marriage teaches a woman where the squeaky boards hide and which cabinets click loudly when they close. I tidied because my hands needed something to do. The phone he swore he hated. Juliet, email is for people who enjoy being confused, he'd say, lit his still face from the nightstand like a lantern at the bottom of a well. A message bloomed on the screen, bright as a wound. You were incredible tonight, Dad. A red heart afterward, neat as a period. The word Dad did something terrible inside me. I felt it climb my ribs, pry apart the familiarity that had held my life together, and whisper, see, you don't know everything. I set the phone down so gently it looked like love, and yet my heartbeat stamped across the room. I told myself I was imagining things, that stray messages landed in wrong inboxes, that people said Dad like a joke. I told myself so many lovely lies, and none of them sounded like my voice. Evidence my mother would whisper if she were still here. She'd taught me to believe what dough said by the sound of my knuckles on its surface, what sugar confessed by the way it fell from a spoon. So I went looking. The receipt in his pocket said San Antonio, though he'd left the house swearing Dallas. A steakhouse we'd celebrated at once decades ago when our hands were still greedy for each other, and I believed my bakery was an adventure we'd survive together. 2 entrées. A heady wine. The total precise indifferent recorded his appetite and suddenly the absence of mine. I took photos like a nervous tourist of my own life. The email. The slip of paper. The way my fingers shook through both. I could hear my mother's clock behind me ticking with a mean patience, and I wanted desperately to put time back where it belonged. Instead, I went to the garage because I wanted air that didn't carry anyone else's perfume. His SUV still held the heat of recent inertia. I opened the passenger door because old habits make strange choices for you, and my palm closed around a small plastic tube. It stuck to my skin the way guilt does when you finally admit you're wearing it. Personal lubricant. There's no graceful way to think those words when they arrive in your marriage uninvited. Julian and I had been careful with each other's bodies for years, tender in absence the way some couples are tender in presence. It had become our quiet treaty, a soft and mutual silence. So the tube glinted like a betrayal that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. When I swallowed, I tasted metal. I put the tube back because some part of me still respected the exhibit too much to disturb it. Then I went inside and washed my hands for longer than I have ever washed dough from my wrists. I could have shaken him awake right then. I could have arranged his lies on the quilt between us like cutlery, pointed ends outward, and demanded he choose which one to hold. But I was raised by a woman who taught me that the truth has a body, and if you keep feeding it, it grows strong enough to stand in any room. My truth was still thin and shivering. So I gave it a coat. I called a friend in the morning, Martha, who has a laugh that makes even grief sit up straighter, and she gave me the name of a man who finds out what people would rather hide. If you're wrong, she said softly, you'll be relieved. If you're right, well then you'll know. Knowing is a frightening mercy. When the investigator texted me later that day, he didn't send sentences. He sent pictures. Time became a stack of little glossy squares on my screen. Julian's profile against the sheen of a restaurant window. His hand resting, not hesitating, on the small of a woman's back. Her dress a black ribbon cutting the evening. The angle of their bodies toward each other, any baker could read the lean of that hunger. I zoomed in, not wanting to, and it was like pushing my face up against a cold window to look at a fire inside someone else's house. The woman turned her head and I recognized the jawline that had kissed my son in wedding photographs. Allison. My daughter-in-law. Something inside my chest didn't break, it rearranged. A shelf came down. A jar shattered. Sugar everywhere, impossible to sweep up without finding stickiness months later. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't even cry, though I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes like weather. Instead, I thought of Daniel, my boy, the way he danced with Allison at their wedding, his grin too big for his face, the way Julian had squeezed my hand during their vows. I thought of the flan recipe Allison begged me to teach her so she could surprise him on Sundays, and how I'd leaned over her shoulder and shown her how to test the syrup with a spoon. All that intimacy weaponized behind my back. I saved everything. I labeled files with dates because I needed order to stand somewhere while my life tilted. When I wiped the kitchen counter down that night, the rag left dull streaks like grief you can't polish away. Julian came home late and kissed my hair like he was smelling his favorite brand of nostalgia. He called me my girl, the way men do when they want you to forget you're a woman, with a mind cataloging every tremor. I said goodnight. I smiled the way women smile when their molars are pressed together. And when he slept, I went to the car again. The same tube sat there like a dare. I didn't breathe until I'd done it, until the decision in my head became action in my hands and the lid clicked shut again. I stood in the garage listening to my heart pound in my ears and thought, I am not going to let them write the ending to my story. And I will not let them do their writing in my house. The morning after I swapped that tube, the sky outside our window was soft gray, the kind of muted dawn that always reminded me of pie crust before it turned golden. Julian shuffled into the kitchen, yawning, reaching for the coffee I had already poured. He didn't notice the way my hand trembled as I slid the cup toward him. He never noticed anymore. He took a sip, grimaced at the bitterness, and mumbled something about a client meeting in Austin. Austin today, Dallas last week, San Antonio before that. Cities like alibis, each one chosen with care, except now I knew there was no map to trust. I watched him straighten his tie in the hallway mirror. His reflection was both familiar and foreign, the same man I had loved since I was a girl, and yet a stranger with secrets curled under his skin. He glanced at me and smiled, the kind of smile meant to reassure. But to me it looked like an apology he would never say aloud. "Don't wait up," he said, his voice casual, rehearsed. Then he grabbed his keys and was gone. I sat there long after the door clicked shut, the clock ticking loud, the walls pressing closer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash every dish in the cupboard. Instead, I picked up my phone and stared at the latest message from Thomas, the investigator. He'd sent another photo. Julian's SUV parked at the side of a quiet motel, the cheap neon sign buzzing like an insect in the corner of the frame. The angle was close enough that I could see Allison's silhouette stepping out of the car. Her hair loose, her hand grazing Julian's arm as she laughed at something I couldn't hear. That laugh used to echo in my kitchen when she came over on Sunday afternoons, pretending to help me with dessert while Daniel fired up the grill. A daughter-in-law I had let into the softest parts of my heart. Now I knew she was carving those same places hollow. I saved the photo and locked my phone. I couldn't cry anymore, my body was too exhausted for tears. Instead, I felt something colder settle in me. A resolve. I wasn't going to confront Julian with screaming accusations he would deny. I wasn't going to let Allison twist the truth until Daniel doubted himself. No. I would let their own actions betray them. That afternoon I baked as though the oven could absorb my rage. Kneading dough until my arms ached, slamming it against the counter until the air hissed out. By evening I was drenched in sweat, but the bread shelves were full and my mind was clearer. Revenge didn't just need anger, it needed patience, precision, timing. Late at night, when Julian's snores filled the room again, I listened to the recording device hidden by our bed. I heard his low murmur, Allison's giggle, the sound of sheets shifting. Proof enough if I wanted to shatter Daniel's world immediately. But I wasn't ready to hand my son a wound that would scar him forever. Not yet. The next day Thomas called. His voice was calm, professional, but tinged with a heaviness I recognized in men who have seen too much. "Mrs. Roberts, I have more than photographs now. I overheard a conversation. Would you like me to send it to you?" My hand shook as I pressed the phone to my ear. "Yes." Minutes later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I sat at the bakery's kitchen table, flour dust still clinging to my apron, and pressed play. Allison's voice floated through the speaker, sharp and mocking. "Dad, we just need to hurry up with those contracts. Once the bakery's in our name, she won't have anything left. That old hag will be out on the street." My breath caught, my stomach turned. Old hag. Words meant for me, spoken with contempt by the woman I had embraced as family. And then Julian's voice, steady, almost amused. "Don't worry. Juliet trusts me too much. She won't see it coming." The recording ended, but the words echoed over and over, hammering at my chest. They weren't just betraying me with their bodies. They were conspiring to take everything I had built, everything I had poured my soul into. My bakery. My home. My name. I closed my eyes and whispered into the empty room, "Not anymore." That night, when Julian stumbled in, smelling of whiskey and perfume, I didn't confront him. I didn't let him see the storm building inside me. Instead, I helped him out of his jacket, the dutiful wife I had always been, and tucked the flash drive with the recording deeper into my purse. My revenge was no longer just about catching them, it was about destroying the empire of lies they thought they could build on my back. And when I saw Julian's phone light up on the counter the next morning with Allison's name flashing across the screen, I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Because the clock was already ticking, and this time it wasn't accusing me, it was counting down for them. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield of secrets, each step deliberate, each breath laced with restraint. I played the role of the devoted wife so convincingly that even I almost believed it at times. I cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, kissed his cheek when he left for his so-called meetings. But inside, I was steel sharpening itself against stone. Thomas kept feeding me evidence. More photos, more recordings. Julian and Allison at a notary's office, papers spread out between them. Allison scribbling notes in red pen like she owned the world, Julian nodding with that same smug smile I used to mistake for charm. I zoomed in on the documents in the photos, my heart pounding. Property transfers. Business agreements. Words I recognized from the contracts I had drafted for my bakery chain. My signature line blank and waiting like an execution order. The betrayal deepened in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. This wasn't just about stolen moments in motel rooms. It was about erasing me. Erasing my life's work. At dinner one evening, Julian swirled his wine and said casually, "Juliet, I might need your signature on a few things tomorrow. Just routine papers for the bakery expansion. Complicated stuff. I'll walk you through it." His tone was smooth, almost paternal, as if I were too naive to understand what he was handing me. He had no idea I'd already seen the papers in Allison's manicured hands. No idea I had listened to him promise her everything I had built with my blood and sleepless nights. I chewed my bread slowly, smiled faintly, and said, "Of course, dear. Just leave them on the table." He seemed satisfied, drained his glass, and left the kitchen humming to himself. I sat there staring at his empty plate, my stomach turning. He thought I was blind. He thought I was still the Juliet who trusted him like gospel. That night when the house went silent, I crept into the garage. The air smelled of dust and gasoline, faint perfume still lingering like a ghost in the upholstery. I opened the glove compartment again. My heart pounded when I saw the tube sitting there untouched since my little exchange. It looked so innocent, so ordinary. If only they knew what poison waited inside. I closed the glove compartment gently and leaned back against the seat. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. My eyes looked harder, older. Not the bakery girl Julian once wooed with flowers and promises, but a woman forged by betrayal. I almost didn't recognize myself, and yet I trusted her more than I had ever trusted the naive girl I used to be. The following morning I staged my absence. Over breakfast I told Julian I had to travel to Nashville to meet a new supplier. I watched the flicker of relief cross his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "That's great, sweetheart," he said, masking his eagerness. "You deserve the success. Don't worry about a thing here." I smiled into my coffee, the bitterness perfect on my tongue. He thought my absence was his freedom. He had no idea it was his noose. Instead of boarding a bus to Nashville, I walked across the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She welcomed me in with raised eyebrows but didn't ask questions. We sat by her front window sipping tea, the view of my driveway clear as a stage. I told her I wanted company while Julian was away. That was the half-truth. The other half was darker. I wanted to witness the trap I had set without being seen. It didn't take long. Mid-morning a taxi pulled up. Allison stepped out, her dress floral and light sunglasses perched like a disguise. She moved quickly, head down, like a thief who believes she's clever. Julian was already at the door, ushering her inside with a furtive glance at the street. My grip on the teacup tightened until my knuckles ached. Mrs. Peterson shifted beside me, her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting between me and the house. She didn't need to ask. She knew. I slipped an earpiece in and opened the app connected to the recorder hidden in my bedroom. Their laughter filled my ear, loud and careless. Allison's voice sharp with triumph. "Finally, Dad. We don't have to sneak around anymore." Julian's reply, low and eager, "She's gone for the day. This house is ours." Ours. The word made bile rise in my throat. My house. My kitchen. My son's childhood walls. Their playground for betrayal. Minutes later, Allison's scream ripped through the earpiece. "Julian, what the hell is this? We are stuck." Her panic rose higher with every second. Julian cursed, fumbling, his voice breaking under strain. "Don't move, damn it, don't move." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. My trap had sprung. That's when I pulled the thin string I had rigged the night before, the one tied to the stove in my kitchen. A skillet of oil caught fire instantly, black smoke curling out of the open window. Mrs. Peterson gasped beside me. "Julie, at your house." "Don't worry," I whispered, my voice steady, almost serene. "Help is already coming." And right on cue, the wail of sirens cut through the air, the fire truck turning onto our street. My son Daniel leapt from the cab, his firefighter's uniform stark against the smoke. My chest clenched. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. Neighbors poured onto their lawns, murmurs rising like a tide. "Is Juliet inside? What happened?" I saw Allison go in earlier, the whispers spread, suspicion blooming like wildfire. And me, I sat there calm, watching the stage I had set play out, knowing that in minutes everything would come crashing down around them. Daniel's boots hit the pavement like thunder as he barked orders to his men. "Get the hoses, break down the door." His voice carried the authority of a fire chief, but I knew the man beneath the helmet, the boy who once sat on my lap as I read him fairy tales, the young man who blushed when Allison walked down the aisle toward him. My son. My only son. And in a matter of moments he would face the ugliest truth of his life. The firefighters swarmed, axes biting into the doorframe, smoke billowing from the kitchen window, exactly as I had planned. Neighbors huddled close, whispering, pointing eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. I watched from Mrs. Peterson's window, my teacup untouched, my heartbeat a steady drum in my ears. Inside my headphones the recorder still whispered their shame. Allison's voice shrill with panic. "Julian, it hurts, we can't move, do something." Julian's frantic curses followed, guttural and desperate. "Stop screaming, damn it, just hold still." The sound of the bed frame creaking under their struggle bled through a grotesque symphony of betrayal. Then came Daniel's voice, closer, "Now inside the house bedroom, now check for victims." Boots pounded across the floor, doors flung open. The moment stretched long like dough refusing to rise. And then silence. A silence so thick it reached me even across the street. I imagined it every detail. Daniel frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening, the color draining from his face as he saw his father and his wife tangled together, glued by my revenge, their naked shame laid bare beneath the harsh light of duty. One of the younger firefighters let out a stunned laugh, quickly smothered when Daniel snapped quiet, his voice cracked on the word, breaking something inside me. Neighbors pressed closer to the yard, hungry for spectacle. Whispers rippled through the crowd. What's happening? Did they find someone? And then a woman's gasp, sharp as glass. It's Julian and Allison. Dear God. Phones appeared like a field of glowing stars. Flashes erupted, recording, immortalizing the disgrace. No rumor now, this was evidence, and it belonged to everyone. I saw Daniel emerge from the house, his face pale, jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might shatter. Behind him his men carried Julian and Allison out on stretchers, thin hospital sheets barely covering them. Allison sobbed uncontrollably, her mascara streaking down her face. Julian kept his eyes shut, jaw rigid like a man walking to his own execution. The crowd erupted. Some gasped in pity, others snickered openly. His own daughter-in-law, filthy. Poor Juliet, after everything she's done for them. What a disgrace to the family. The words swirled like embers, feeding on each other, growing hotter, sharper. Julian muttered as they carried him past, don't let them see, please don't let them see us. But it was far too late. They had seen. They would always see. Daniel didn't look at either of them. His eyes darted once across the street to me, standing behind Mrs. Peterson's lace curtains. For a moment our gazes locked. Pain, betrayal, rage, all of it flickered across his face before he turned away, barking orders to clear the crowd. The ambulance pulled away with its siren wailing, carrying Julian and Allison toward a humiliation that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The neighbors slowly dispersed, their whispers trailing off into the evening. But I stayed at the window, my hands clasped so tightly they trembled. This was what I had wanted. Proof. Exposure. Justice. And yet as I watched my son's back stiff with anguish, I realized revenge didn't feel like triumph. It felt like ash in my mouth, bitter and choking. Still I straightened my shoulders. What was done could not be undone. The truth had been dragged into the light, kicking and screaming. And now we would all have to live with it. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their cold glow making every face look more hollow than it really was. I sat on one of those plastic chairs with my purse clutched tightly in my lap, as if the flash drive hidden inside was the only anchor keeping me from drifting away. Mrs. Peterson sat beside me in silence, her hand resting gently on mine. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She had seen enough. After what felt like hours, a doctor emerged, wiping sweat from his brow. His voice was low, cautious. Mrs. Roberts, they've been separated. No permanent damage. Just skin abrasions. They'll need ointment and rest. His tone faltered on that last word, as though rest was something either of them would ever deserve again. I nodded, thanked him softly, and allowed a nurse to hand me 2 tubes of medicinal cream. Her eyes were kind, her smile tinged with pity. They'll be in pain for a while, but this will help. You should stay strong. Strong. The word twisted in my chest. Strength to me no longer felt like lifting flour sacks or balancing ledges at the bakery. Strength was standing in this hallway and pretending I hadn't orchestrated their downfall. Strength was carrying the knowledge that my own son had witnessed the unthinkable and still walking forward without crumbling. When I entered their room, the air was thick with the stench of shame. Allison lay curled on the bed, her mascara streaked into black rivers down her face. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Julian sat propped against pillows, his skin raw, his dignity stripped, his voice a ragged whisper. Juliet, I can explain. I cut him off with a glance colder than any words. I placed the tubes on the bedside table, smiling faintly, a wife's gentle mask still intact. Here. For the pain. Then I turned and walked out before he could gather another excuse. Minutes later, their screams tore through the ward. Allison shrieked, first her voice sharp enough to rattle the window panes. It burns my skin's on fire. Julian roared, curses thrashing against the sheets. Nurses rushed in, alarms blaring, doors flying open. Confusion erupted in the hallway, patients peering out with horrified curiosity. I stood calmly near the vending machine, slipping coins into the slot for a coffee I didn't even want. My hands didn't tremble. Not once. The mustard tubes had done their work. As the chaos peaked, Daniel arrived. His uniform was gone, replaced by jeans and a faded shirt, but the exhaustion in his eyes made him look older than he should have at 35. He saw me, and for a moment I thought he might collapse into my arms like he did when he was a boy. But he didn't. He just pressed a thick folder into my hands, my evidence, the divorce papers, the contracts Allison and Julian had tried to forge. I carried them back into the room, past the nurses shouting for more water, past Allison's hysterical sobs. I laid the folder on Julian's lap, leaning down so only he could hear me. 40 years end here. Sign them. And disappear. His eyes were wild, searching my face for mercy he would never find. Allison, through her tears, turned to Daniel, her voice breaking, honey, please. Forgive me. I made a mistake. I love you, I always did. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the wall, as if the weight of their betrayal had hollowed him out completely. He turned and walked out, leaving her words to wither in the sterile air. Julian reached for my hand, desperation dripping from his voice. Juliet, listen to me. I didn't want this. She pressured me. Please don't do this. I pulled away, my voice steady as stone. You did this, Julian. Every lie, every betrayal, you chose it. The nurse stepped in, then ordering silence. I left without another glance, the echo of their agony trailing behind me like smoke from a dying fire. Out in the corridor, Daniel leaned against the wall, his head bowed into his hands. I placed a trembling palm on his shoulder, feeling his body quake beneath it. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Why, Mom? Why did it have to be Dad? Why her? I had no answer. Some wounds defied explanation. I just wrapped my arms around him, pulling him close, holding on as tightly as I could while the ruins of our family smoldered behind us. That night, as I walked through the bakery alone, the ovens cooling, the scent of flour and sugar lingering like ghosts, I understood something with chilling clarity. Revenge doesn't heal. It scorches. It exposes. And it leaves scars you carry whether you want them or not. But even as my heart ached for my son, for myself, I also knew this: Julian and Allison would never rise again. Their names were ruined, their ambitions burned to ash. And I was still standing. The weeks that followed were a strange blur of whispers, stares, and cautious smiles. My name was on everyone's lips, sometimes in admiration, sometimes in pity. People came into the bakery with wide eyes and hushed voices, pretending to order pastries while really wanting to catch a glimpse of the woman who had survived such a scandal. Juliet, you're so strong, Mrs. Miller said one morning as she bought her usual loaf of rye bread. Her eyes lingered on me with a mix of pride and sorrow. Most women would have crumbled. But you stood tall. I nodded, offering her the bread wrapped neatly in paper. Strong, they called me. Yet every night when the ovens were cold and the lights dimmed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the empty chair where Julian once sat a day. My chest would ache with something I couldn't name. Was it grief, rage, relief, or all of them tangled together? Daniel moved back in soon after the hospital incident. He didn't announce it formally. He just walked in one evening carrying a duffel bag and set it down by the stairs. I'll stay for a while, Mom, he said simply. His voice was steady, but his eyes, they carried a weight no young man should bear. I only nodded, silently grateful for his presence. We fell into a new rhythm. Mornings began with us side by side in the bakery, him handling deliveries and calls, me shaping loaves and pastries with flour-dusted hands. Customers smiled at him kindly, some patting his shoulder, whispering, "We are sorry, son. Stay strong." He would nod, his jaw tight, but his eyes never softened. One evening as we ate dinner together, just rice, beans and bread, he finally spoke. Mom, I can't believe it. I still wake up and think it was a nightmare. Then I see her things missing from my closet and I remember. He paused, pushing the rice around his plate. And Dad, my own father. How could he? I reached across the table, my fingers curling around his. Because people are weaker than we think, Daniel. Weakness dressed up as desire, as ambition, as love. But weakness all the same. My voice cracked, but I held his gaze. His lips trembled as he whispered, I feel like a fool. No, son, I said firmly. You were betrayed. That's not the same as being a fool. And you're stronger now for knowing the truth. He nodded slowly, though I could see the storm still brewing inside him. Some storms don't pass quickly, they linger, reshaping the landscape of a soul. News of Julian and Allison's humiliation spread far beyond our town. Videos taken by neighbors had gone viral online. Strangers from cities I'd never set foot in left comments on bakery posts, "Stay strong, Juliet. Justice always finds the wicked." Others said, "You're an inspiration to all women betrayed by love." I didn't feel like an inspiration. I felt like a survivor. There's a difference. As for Julian, he disappeared from my life. Rumors swirled. Some said he moved in with a distant cousin, others whispered he'd gone bankrupt trying to pay off Allison's debts. I didn't care enough to confirm. For 40 years I had carried him like a stone around my neck. Now the stone had dropped, and though the mark remained, I could finally breathe. Allison's fate was harsher. Her family, once proud and haughty, shunned her. Susan no longer strutted around the neighborhood with her chin high. Instead, she avoided eye contact, humiliated by her daughter's disgrace. Allison tried to rebuild in another city, but the internet never forgets. Whispers followed her everywhere. Jobs disappeared. Friends cut ties. She became a cautionary tale, a living reminder of how betrayal never ends well. One Sunday, while Daniel and I were closing the bakery, I found him staring at the rows of flan cooling on the counter. His eyes were red, but his voice was calm. "Mom, I'll never forgive them. Not just for what they did to me, but for what they did to you. You gave Dad everything and he threw it away. You welcomed Allison like a daughter and she spit on that. They destroyed our family." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the muscles tense beneath my touch. "Yes, they did. But listen to me, Daniel. If you carry hatred too long, it will poison you. Don't let their choices define the rest of your life. We survived. That's our victory." He looked at me, then really looked, and for the first time in weeks a faint smile touched his lips. "You're right, Mom. We survived." That night after he went to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea. I thought of my life, of being that young girl in San Diego who believed in love, of the years spent kneading dough while Julian chased other dreams, of the betrayal that had nearly broken me. And I realized something: survival is its own kind of revenge. To keep living, to keep building, to keep loving in the face of betrayal, that is the sweetest justice. I took a sip of my tea, savoring its warmth. The storm had passed, leaving ruins in its wake. But from ruins new things can grow. Stronger. Brighter. Unbreakable. The morning light filtered through the bakery windows, golden and forgiving, but I felt none of its warmth. I was kneading dough with the familiar rhythm of 40 years, yet my mind wandered back to every scar the last months had carved into me. Flour clung to my hands, but underneath it the ache of betrayal still lingered. Customers came and went, each with their own whispers and sympathetic glances. Some pretended not to know, speaking cheerfully of bread and pies, while others lingered too long, hoping to glimpse the woman who had brought her cheating husband and conniving daughter-in-law to their knees. Their eyes carried pity, curiosity, even admiration, but I had no appetite for any of it. I just wanted peace. Peace, however, is never so easily found when betrayal is your shadow. One afternoon, as I arranged trays of sweet rolls in the display case, Daniel walked in from the back office, a folder in his hand. His face was pale, tight, as if holding back a storm. He placed the folder on the counter and opened it, sliding out several papers. "Mom," he said quietly, "these are Dad's old financial records." I didn't want to go through them, but something wasn't adding up with the bakery's accounts. "And I found this." He handed me a document stamped with a notary seal. It was a contract, a fraudulent transfer agreement already bearing Julian's signature. My name, however, had been forged in shaky cursive at the bottom. My stomach clenched. He forged my name." Daniel nodded grimly. "Yes. If they hadn't been caught, if your plan hadn't exposed them, you would have lost everything, Mom. The bakery, the house, all of it." The room spun around me. I gripped the counter to steady myself. I had known Julian and Allison were plotting, but seeing the ink of my forged name, the audacity, the cruelty was like a knife driven in deeper. I sank into the chair behind the register, my hands trembling. 40 years of my life. All those nights I stayed up to keep the ovens warm, all those mornings I worked with bleeding hands. And he was ready to erase me as if I were nothing. Daniel knelt beside me, his eyes blazing. "You are not nothing, Mom. You are everything. You built this with your own blood and sweat. Don't ever let his betrayal make you doubt that." Tears spilled down my cheeks. I had held them back for so long, but now they fell freely, staining the papers spread across the counter. For the first time I allowed myself to grieve not just the betrayal but the death of the man I thought I had married. Julian hadn't died, but the version of him I had loved, the man who once held my hand under San Diego stars and promised me forever, that man was long gone. That night, as Daniel slept upstairs, I pulled out the thick envelope where I had stored all the evidence. The photos, the videos, the audio recordings, and now this forged document. I laid them out on the table one by one, as if building a shrine to betrayal. And yet I didn't feel hatred burning as fiercely as before. What I felt was something colder, quieter. Vindication. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had erased themselves. Their shame, their humiliation, their downfall, it was complete. And I had survived. The next morning I tucked the forged contract back into the envelope and locked it away. Some battles didn't need to be fought in courts or public squares. Some victories were private, known only to the heart that had endured. Weeks turned into months. The bakery flourished more than ever. Hotels placed bigger orders, customers lined up outside on Saturdays, and new faces filled the little shop each day. People wanted not just my bread but a piece of my story, a taste of resilience baked into every loaf. Daniel too began to heal. Slowly his laughter returned, though softer, now tempered by loss. One evening as we shared a simple dinner, he looked at me and said, "Mom, maybe one day I'll be ready to love again. But I promise I'll choose differently. I'll never let anyone play me for a fool like she did." I reached across the table and held his hand, squeezing it tight. "When you do, son, you'll choose someone who deserves you. Because you're worth more than the lies you've endured." In the quiet of that moment I realized something. Revenge had been my fire, my fuel when I thought I might drown. But survival was the real victory. And forgiveness, not for them but for myself, was the key to finally moving on. Late at night, when the ovens were cold and the town was asleep, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the same one that had once mocked me with its accusatory rhythm. Now, though, it felt different. Each tick was no longer a reminder of lies but of survival, of time still mine to live. And every so often I whispered to the silence, "I am still here. Stronger than ever." The town never truly stopped talking about what happened, though the words grew softer with time. At first it was all gasps and whispers. "Did you hear about Julian and Allison stuck together like dogs in heat?" Laughter, shame, disgust, it echoed through the streets like a cruel carnival. But slowly, as gossip always does, the noise quieted, replaced by something heavier, silence. That silence carried its own weight. People didn't laugh as much anymore when they mentioned my name. They lowered their voices as if speaking too loud would reopen wounds. I found that I didn't mind. Let them speak in hushed tones. Let them wonder. I had no need for their pity or their praise. I had my bakery, my son, and my sanity. That was more than either Julian or Allison could claim. But wounds don't heal in neat lines. They throb at night, flare up at odd times. One evening I was cleaning the bakery shelves after closing when I found an old photo album tucked behind some flour bins. It was from the early years, me and Julian smiling, arms around each other in front of the very first bakery we opened. My hair was long and shining, his eyes clear and bright. We looked like children who thought love would be enough to carry us through life. I ran my fingers over the photo, tracing his face. "Who were you?" I whispered to the empty room. "And when did you decide I wasn't enough?" Tears welled up, but I wiped them away with the back of my flour-dusted hand. I had promised myself I wouldn't cry for him anymore. He had taken enough of me already. Daniel noticed the changes in me. One night as we sat together over bowls of soup, he said, "Mom, you've been quieter lately." "Not sad, just quieter." I smiled faintly. "I think it's because I finally understand something. Betrayal doesn't just destroy trust, it forces you to rebuild who you are. And I'm still rebuilding." He looked at me with pride and sorrow mingled in his eyes. "You're the strongest person I know." Strength? Everyone called me that. But strength isn't some blazing fire. It's not even a steady flame. It's the quiet act of waking up each day and choosing not to let your heart collapse under the weight of betrayal. It's serving coffee to a customer while your insides still tremble with old pain. It's stirring caramel for flan while remembering the woman who once learned that recipe at your side and then stabbed you in the back. I began to take small steps toward reclaiming myself. I joined a local cooking club, sharing recipes with women who laughed loudly and lived honestly. I went to church, sitting beneath stained glass windows that painted my face in colors of forgiveness and grace. I even started walking with Mrs. Peterson in the evenings, listening to her chatter about neighbors and grandchildren. Life was not extraordinary, but it was mine again. And then came the letter. One afternoon, Daniel brought in the mail and handed me an envelope with handwriting I recognized instantly. Julian's. My hands trembled as I tore it open. "Juliet," it began. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I barely deserve to live after what I've done. But I can't die without telling you that I am sorry. I was weak, foolish, blinded by vanity. Allison is gone now, she left me when the money ran out. I have nothing. No family, no friends, no dignity. I think of you every day, of what I threw away. Please, if there is even a sliver of compassion left in you, let me see you one last time before I go." I sat there staring at the words. My heart twisted, not with longing but with a strange ache I couldn't name. Here was the man who had ruined me begging now for scraps of mercy. Daniel saw the letter in my hands and asked softly, "What does he want?" "To see me," I whispered. "Are you going to?" His tone was sharp, protective. I folded the letter slowly, my eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know yet." That night I couldn't sleep. Memories rushed back, Julian's laughter in our youth, his hand in mine when Daniel was born, his pride when I opened the bakery. Could I deny that those moments had existed, even if they were poisoned later by betrayal? By dawn I had my answer. I would see him. Not for him, but for me. To close the chapter. To look the ghost of my husband in the eye and tell him I had survived without him. When I entered the shabby apartment where he now lived, I barely recognized him. His hair was gray and unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes sunken. The proud, deceitful man who once plotted to steal everything from me was gone. In his place was just a broken old man. He reached for me weakly. "Juliet." I stepped back, holding up my hand. "Don't. You don't get to touch me anymore." His lips trembled. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry. I ruined everything. I lost you, I lost Daniel, I lost myself." I stared at him, my chest tight. "Yes. You did. And you have to live with that. But I don't. I've moved on. I've built something stronger than your lies. Tears filled his eyes. Do you hate me? I shook my head slowly. No. Hate would mean I still give you power. I feel nothing for you anymore, Julian. Nothing. And with that I turned and walked out, leaving him behind forever. When I walked out of Julian's apartment, the air outside hit me like a baptism. It was brisk, clean, untainted by his presence. For years I had lived under the weight of his lies, suffocated by the invisible strings of betrayal. But that morning, standing on the cracked sidewalk, I felt those strings snap one by one. I hadn't forgiven him, not in the way he wanted, but I had released him from my soul. And in doing so I had freed myself. Back at the bakery, Daniel was waiting for me. He didn't ask what Julian had said, didn't need to. He saw the steadiness in my eyes, the way my shoulders no longer slumped under a burden too heavy to carry. You look lighter, he said softly. I nodded. Because I finally let him go. From then on, life didn't magically become perfect, but it became bearable, then beautiful in small ways. The bakery grew busier, not just because of the scandal that had put us in the town's whispers, but because people trusted me. They saw resilience baked into every loaf, every flan. They weren't just buying pastries, they were buying a story of survival. Some mornings young women would linger at the counter, eyes wide with admiration. Mrs. Roberts once said shyly, "You're such an inspiration. I don't know how you kept going after what happened." I'd smile, hand her the bag of bread and reply, because giving up wasn't an option. Life doesn't stop just because someone betrays you. You decide whether to crumble or rise. And I had risen. Daniel too began to heal. Slowly laughter returned to him. One evening as we scrubbed down the bakery together, he told me about a woman he'd met at the firehouse fundraiser. She's kind, Mom. Really kind. Not like. His voice trailed off, but I knew the name he couldn't bring himself to say. Give yourself time, I told him gently. Your heart knows when it's ready. Don't rush it. Don't fear it either. He smiled faintly. Maybe I get my stubborn hope from you. That night lying in bed I thought about hope. How fragile it seemed, like sugar spun into candy, delicate and prone to shattering. And yet even after betrayal, hope clung to us, me and my bakery, Daniel and his work, both of us daring to believe we could build something new from the ashes. But betrayal leaves scars. I still woke some nights in a sweat, haunted by Allison's laugh in the recordings, Julian's voice promising her the world that should have been mine. Sometimes when I passed a fancy restaurant downtown, the memory of that receipt from San Antonio clawed at me. And yet instead of drowning in it, I used it. I let the bitterness sharpen me, remind me never again to let someone else write the story of my life. Months passed, and one morning as I was arranging fresh pastries in the window, Mrs. Peterson came in with a mischievous smile. Juliet, have you heard Allison moved out of state? Nobody knows where. Some say she's living with a man twice her age, others say she's alone. But everyone agrees she's ruined. I nodded quietly, placing a tray of cinnamon rolls on the counter. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Karma had done its work. I didn't need to. Instead, I whispered to myself, she can live wherever she wants. I'll still be standing here stronger than both of them. One Sunday, Daniel and I closed the bakery early and drove to the coast. We walked along the shore, the ocean stretching wide and endless before us. I took a deep breath of the salty air and said, "Do you remember when your father used to bring us here back when you were little?" Daniel's eyes darkened. I remember the kites. The laughter. I thought we were happy. So did I admitted. Then I smiled faintly. But happiness isn't always what it seems. Still, we make new happiness now. You and me. A different kind. He squeezed my hand, and in that moment I felt the bond between us stronger than ever. Betrayal had tried to destroy us, but instead it had bound us tighter. We were all we had left, and it was enough. That night, as the tide pulled back and the sky turned crimson with the setting sun, I made myself a promise. I would no longer live as a victim. I would live as a survivor, a builder, a woman who turned grief into fire and betrayal into strength. And maybe, just maybe, one day I would laugh again without remembering the sound of their deceit. Seasons shifted around me, each one carving its quiet marks on the life I was rebuilding. Spring brought blossoms to the town square, their colors so bright they almost mocked the shadows still inside me. Summer brought tourists who stopped by the bakery, delighted to taste the famous flan they'd read about online. Autumn painted the streets gold, and in the cool air I found myself breathing easier. By winter I realized an entire year had passed since Julian's betrayal had come crashing into the light. And I was still here. Stronger. Steadier. But strength doesn't mean the past stops knocking at your door. One snowy afternoon, Daniel came in from shoveling the walkway, his cheeks flushed red. He held a folded newspaper in his hand, his mouth tight. "Mom, you should see this." I wiped flour from my hands and took it. There on the front page of the local section was Julian's face, older, thinner, his eyes hollow. The headline read, "Former businessman declares bankruptcy." The article detailed how he had lost everything. Every investment gone, every asset stripped, every ally turned their back. He was living in a rundown shelter, a shadow of the man who once thought he could steal the world from me. Daniel searched my face. "Do you feel sorry for him?" I stared at the photo for a long moment. Once this man had been my entire world. Once I had thought we were two halves of a whole. But now, looking at him, I felt only a distant echo. "No," I said quietly. "I feel nothing. And that's the real ending for me." Daniel exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath. "Good. Because he doesn't deserve another piece of you, Mom. Not even your pity." I folded the paper and set it aside. The past had already taken too much. It would take no more. That evening, as I cleaned the bakery, I thought about karma. How it had unfolded, not in one dramatic blaze but in steady, merciless strokes. Julian and Allison had been stripped bare, not by my hands, not by my schemes, but by their own choices. Betrayal carries its own poison, and they had drunk deeply. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better: peace. Still, healing is never linear. Some nights I sat alone at the kitchen table, the clock ticking steadily, and wondered what my life might have been if Julian had chosen differently. If Allison had been the daughter-in-law I had once dreamed she was. Those thoughts pressed like thorns, but I let them prick me, then let them go. They were ghosts. I was alive. Daniel, though scarred, grew into a man even stronger than before. His work at the fire department earned him respect. Children in the neighborhood waved when they saw him. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks for his bravery. One night over dinner he said, "Mom, I don't know if I'll ever understand why Dad and Allison did what they did. But I know this: what they broke, we've rebuilt. And maybe that's all that matters." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sorrow but from pride. "Yes, son. That's all that matters." Months later, on a quiet Sunday, I found myself lighting a candle in church. I bowed my head, not praying for Julian or Allison but for myself. For Daniel. For the strength to keep walking step by step into the future. And in that glow I realized something profound: forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about me. About releasing the last chains of bitterness so they couldn't bind me anymore. When I left the church, the winter sun shone brightly on the snow, making it glitter like diamonds. For the first time in years I felt the cold not as an enemy but as something clean, pure, renewing. I turned my face to the light and whispered, "I survived. I endured. And I will not waste the rest of my life on grief." And with that I walked back toward the bakery, toward Daniel, toward the life that was still mine to live. The years that followed became a testament not to what I had lost but to what I had rebuilt. My bakery grew into more than a business, it became a sanctuary. People came not just for bread or flan but for the warmth, for the story whispered between the shelves of pastries. They'd look at me with admiration, sometimes even reverence, and I realized I had become something I never thought I'd be: a symbol of survival. Daniel stood beside me every step of the way. Together we laughed again, not with the careless joy of the past, but with the deeper laughter of two people who had endured storms and lived to see the sunlight. His pain, though not gone, softened over time. Eventually he began seeing someone new, a woman named Claire, kind and patient, who never once pushed him to heal faster than he was ready. Watching him take those first steps toward love again filled me with hope I thought I'd lost forever. Julian faded into the background of life like an old photograph you keep in a drawer but never take out. Sometimes I'd hear murmurs of him alone, bitter, moving from place to place. Allison too disappeared from the town's conversations, her name mentioned only in pitying sighs. They had chosen their paths and the world had delivered their punishment. I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. Karma had worked its slow, merciless justice. But here's the truth I learned: revenge might satisfy the hunger in your soul for a moment, but it doesn't sustain you. What sustains you is reclaiming your life piece by piece and daring to find joy again. What heals you isn't watching your betrayers fall, it's watching yourself rise. One evening, as Daniel closed the shutters on the bakery, he turned to me and said, "Mom, do you ever regretted exposing them the way you did?" I thought about it, the memories replaying like a dark film reel: the superglue, the fire, the ambulance, the hospital. The gasps, the whispers, the humiliation that spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. For a long time I had asked myself if I had gone too far. But then I looked at Daniel alive and strong, and at the bakery thriving, and I shook my head. "No," I said softly. Because it wasn't just revenge. It was survival. And sometimes survival demands fire. He nodded, and in his eyes I saw not judgment but understanding. Now when I sit by the window at night with a cup of tea, I don't see the ghost of Julian anymore. I see the woman staring back at me in the glass, the lines on her face carved by tears and laughter, her eyes carrying both pain and resilience. I see a woman who chose to fight, to endure, to rise. And if you're listening to my story now, maybe you've been betrayed too. Maybe your trust has been shattered, your heart broken in ways you thought you'd never recover from. If that's you, hear me: betrayal does not define you. What defines you is what you do after. You can let it bury you, or you can use it as the soil to grow stronger than ever before. I chose to rise. And so can you. So if my story has reached you, whether you're in a big city, a quiet town, or halfway across the world, I hope it reminds you of this truth: you are stronger than the ones who betrayed you. You are more than the scars they left. If you felt something in my words, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? How far has my story traveled? Together we carry these lessons so none of us ever feel alone in the shadows of betrayal.